You'll recall last week I was talking about Kristallnacht, right? The 80th, I believe, anniversary of Kristallnacht. It was 1938. Yeah, that would be the 80th anniversary is November 9th. It's about 2 weeks from now. And we've now had our Kristallnacht. I'm not sitting here saying that I was prescient or anything, but it certainly seems like, that's it. This is it. And the Republican Party, I mean, here we have a party that is pro-war, pro-gun, pro-death penalty, voted against denying guns to terrorists or the mentally ill. Sowing the seeds of racial hatred, opposing food stamps for kids. There he is. All this stuff, it's like the Republican Party has morphed into a death cult, it seems to me. And the question in my mind is, how do you deprogram the victims of a death cult? This happened to the people living in Nazi Germany. I knew some of these people. I knew when Louise and I lived in Germany back in the 80s, I knew some old Nazis. They literally had been programmed. It happened in Japan. And the thing that broke the programming for those two death cults was losing in the war. What's it going to take here? Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the first hour of the program, taking your calls for the hour. He's a congressman from California. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. Congressman Khanna, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back on.
How do we deprogram the people who have been so aggressively programmed by Fox News and right-wing hate radio and now the mainstream Republican Party, frankly, into this to use the quote from Milton Mayer's book, I believe it is, this orgy of hate and fear?
Well, it's a challenging and difficult question, especially as we see the incidents of violence break out across the country in a way we haven't seen for decades. I don't have a magic solution. One person suggested that where you have universities and colleges, in community colleges, you've seen greater appreciation for diversity and a greater appreciation for free thinking, and that we ought to be really looking at expanding those institutions of higher learning and expanding preschool education across America into parts of the community. I mean, I think that it's a long-range process of how do we get a liberal arts type education or people questioning information they're receiving, and it's not some short-term fix.
Yeah, it seems also that there's like institutional stuff. I may not have these details right, but I'm pretty sure I do. That during the Reagan administration, Bill Bennett, as the education secretary, who had when his very, very short run for president, his main thing was abolishing the Department of Education, which of course is why Reagan put him in charge of it. Bill Bennett, who gave us such wonderful little clips as, check this out. This was literally Ronald Reagan, Secretary of Education back in the day. This was in the 80s. Here we go. Oh, it's not playing. Anyway, he just said some pretty outrageous things. But basically, my understanding is that they took civics out of the recommended, national standards. They weren't mandatory national standards, but the recommended standards for education. And now some minority of our schools apparently teach civics. And again, I'm not sure on that fact. I know that, because people call into the program all the time saying, well, they don't teach physics here in my town in Mississippi. And then somebody will call in from some, wealthy town in California or upstate New York and say, oh, we had a great physics class just, last year's, or excuse me, civics class.
Right.
So what do we do?
Well, the question I would ask Will Bennett, and then I'll answer your question. Remember when he wrote that book, The Death of Outrage, after Bill Clinton scandals? I mean, where is William Bennett these days? I mean,
well, he wrote the little book of virtues too. He might have passed away. I mean, he had that huge gambling scandal.
Well, maybe.
I do know.
I don't want to speak ill of him, but where are the people who shared his view and were clamoring for virtue and criticizing the death of outrage? I mean, why don't you hear any of those voices with what Trump has done in making a mockery of the presidency? I mean, there's been silence. But I think having some basic civic education and teaching folks about the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Gettysburg Address, the I Have a Dream speech, Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail, his speech about militarism in the Vietnam War, some basic things about American history would be the part of the answer in combating propaganda that is totally inconsistent with our founding. I mean, our founders, though not perfect, were really philosophers. I mean, they had this sense of the Enlightenment ideal of knowledgeable citizens. It was a very small group of citizens, white male property owners, but amongst those citizens, they thought you ought to have education, and you ought to have reason, and you ought to have debate, and you really ought to read. And so we are so far away from that in terms of what constitutes political discourse that a return to some of the basic principles that founded this country and bringing that into education and education in every part of the country. I think that is the only long-term way that you combat the ignorance and the hate.
Yeah. And yet there's this both sidesism that makes me crazy. I don't see Hallie Jackson's MSNBC show is on 7 a.m. here on the West Coast, and I watched the first 10 minutes of it or so this morning, and she started out with John Kasich, the Republican governor from Ohio, who was doing his both sidesism. You know, well, both sides have to tone back the rhetoric. I'm sorry, I'm not hearing this kind of hateful rhetoric on our side, number one. And number two, then she ended that segment with a clip from Ronald Reagan talking about how we can't have racism in the United States. It's a terrible thing. As if, you know, that was like Reagan's position. Reagan's first speech after he was in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman were murdered, and it was a speech to an exclusively white audience on states' rights. Here's the Bill Bennett clip that I was looking for. This is what Bill. See, again, these guys they've been catering to the racists since the 1980s. This is Bill Bennett, the former Secretary of Education.
But I do know that it's true that if you wanted to reduce crime, you could, if that were your sole purpose, you could abort every black baby in this country and your crime rate would go down. That would be an impossible, ridiculous, and morally reprehensible thing to do. But your crime rate would go down.
See that, and
wow.
You know, and nobody even freaked out when he said that back in the 80s.
Amazing. I mean, it's just shocking when you think about historical figures and you wonder how they said certain things. This is an example of someone in contemporary times is spewing that kind of hate. It's just shocking.
I think you can draw a straight line from Reagan's speech in Philadelphia and Bill Bennett's comments like that. And these were not, I mean, these kinds of comments came out of the Reagan administration regularly. They were just very rarely discussed. The other thing that blows my mind, I'm sorry to monopolize you here. I will turn you over to our callers in just a second. But the other thing that blows my mind is that there's really the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. There's three pieces to it that are really pretty major. You know, I think, in fact, let me get the exact quote here. The first major piece of it is exactly what the shooter tweeted out an hour before he committed the murder. There's a Jewish organization called HIAS, H-I-A-S, yep. And you know and I'm looking for what exactly that's an acronym for, but basically it's the international. It's a Jewish group that helps refugees, and originally mostly they helped Jewish refugees, and now they're helping refugees from all over the world. Here's his tweet from just before he went to shoot these guys up. These people in the synagogue. HIAS likes to bring invaders in to our country who kill our people. I can't stand by and watch my people get slaughtered. Screw your optics. I'm going in. And then on October 20th, he had, in response to a National Refugee Shabbat event that was put on by HIAS, he tweeted in response to them because they had just listed the addresses of 300 Jewish congregations in 33 states that were celebrating the work of HIAS. He said his response to them, and I'm not sure this was a tweet, it might have been a Facebook, it simply says alongside a link in the New York Times. He said, "You like to bring in hostile invaders to dwell among us? ? We appreciate the list of friends you have provided, period." In other words, the list of churches. And this church was synagogues. This synagogue was on that list. So you've got that. You got the fact that the shooter was using an AR-15, which is why he was able to kill so many people and take out 4 cops. I mean, he didn't kill them, but he shot 4 cops, and they were wearing body armor. And then, of course, you've got the anti-Semitism, and it seems like everybody's focusing on the anti-Semitism, which is huge and important, and it's a crisis in America. But I think that Trump's going off on the caravan, and he's back to it again this morning. Was probably the thing that actually triggered this guy or pushed this guy to do this particular act in this particular synagogue at this particular time. Your thoughts?
Tom, I appreciate you raising the issue of Hayes, because there's a beautiful piece by Lev Golinkin today, actually, in the New York Times. And Lev is someone I know. He came to this country when he was 9 in 1980. And he talks about how Hayes helped him and his mother and his family come to the United States from the Soviet Union, and what Hayes meant. And he talks about how Hayes now is actually not helping primarily Jews, because the focus is on refugees more broadly, and why that has engendered so much hate. So you're absolutely right that the primary motive of this shooter seems to be a concern of immigrants coming into the United States. And there was an article I read where the right has this novel, The Camp of Saints. I don't know if you've read it, but it's this a French novel talking about people, actually, of all places, India, coming in boatloads, 1 million Indians to invade France.
Oh, my God. It's like the Turner Diaries.